In this video, I'll be sharing some of my tips on how to get friends and family, and especially youngsters, into the hobby. We all know that this hobby can come with a bit of a learning curve, but recently it was my son's 6th birthday and he asked me for D&D for his birthday. And when I tried to figure out what part of D&D did he want, he said all of it. And that led me on this little journey on how on earth am I going to make this hobby accessible for a 6-year-old, and also my 3-year-old in the process, and then of course my wife wanted to get involved. There's all sorts of aspects to this hobby about the different miniatures that you've got, also the rule systems, the games that you can play, and then the painting. And that can be a bit of a minefield and really hard to get new players into it who've never played this sort of thing, or new painters into the hobby. So hopefully some of these tips will help. So if you've got kids and you want to help them get into the hobby, maybe pick up a paintbrush or pick up a dice, then this will hopefully be for you. So first up, let's talk miniatures and what sort of thing to go for. Now this will be a little bit easier if you've got a 3D printer, but you can always buy these sort of miniatures from places like Etsy as well. So the first set of miniatures I grabbed were these by Dice Heads, and the reason I went for these is A, they're quite cartoony, there's a lot of fun things, some dinosaurs here, so my son would absolutely love them. But there's basically loads of different like animal warriors and loads of different themes like that. But even better is they're all very cartoony and out of proportion, so they've got big heads and they've got big body parts and just big weapons. Everything is really big and chunky. You compare this to something from Games Workshop that has these tiny little details on there that want to drive you insane. It becomes so much easier to paint. So for a new person getting into the hobby who wants to be able to pick up a paintbrush and not focus on all those tiny little details, these are superb. Also because they're a bit bigger in terms of the proportions and stuff, and they don't have all these fiddly bits hanging off them, they're far less likely to break, which is good when you're dealing with little ones. Dice Heads also do some terrain as well, so I printed off this little village house that my son absolutely loves, and there's other bits that you can grab from them. But speaking of terrain, one thing that I found that I really like are these trees. Now these trees are great because they print without support on an FDM printer. And the good thing about this compared to something like resin is they are a lot more robust. You can play them either like dead with no canopy, or you can print off these canopies here. And they just go together, and my kids have loved playing with these and just placing them around. And I don't need to worry about my kids like breaking bits off of them. And I'll have these linked down in the description below. Depending on your print settings, they print off really quickly. And I decided that I print the trunks off in brown and obviously the canopy off in green. And that way I don't have to worry about paint and then scratching and then seeing the layers underneath it. And these work great. So you can then have your little battlefield or whatever you can do with your kids, pop them around, it's just nice, easy, you don't need to go too crazy. So at this stage, you've chosen your miniatures that your kids are going to be playing with, or your friends and your family who've never picked up a paintbrush before. You've got a little bit of terrain as well that you want to play with, but what are they actually going to paint the minis with? Now, there's two types of paint that work really well for people who are just getting into the hobby, or especially kids. Now, you could go for contrast paints, but the problem with contrast paints is the tub that they come in. If you have a tub of paint that's very liquidy, and you put them around kids, that tub of paint will soon end up on your table or on the floor. So in this case, I recommend grabbing something like the Army Painter Speed Paints. I think they are probably one of the best ones to be using because they come in little bottles, and it means you can control the amount of paint that goes into a palette, which means you can also control the amount of mess that your kids will inevitably make. Now, the reason I'd suggest something like a contrast paint or an Army Painter Speed Paint is they're really easy to use. Literally, my kid was painting with these really quickly. My wife has also done a little bit of painting with these, and she's never done any painting in the past. And for anybody getting into this hobby, you don't have to worry about thinning down the paints and having loads of gloopy mess all over your models. They're just really easy, even for a 6-year-old, and in one of the cases here, my 3-year-old to be able to pick up and use. They choose the color, they dip their paintbrush, and they get going. These are absolutely not works of art here. This is the one done by my son, and this one here is the one done by my daughter. And obviously, there's a lot to be desired, but they found it really fun, really easy to use these paints, clean their paintbrushes up afterwards, and ultimately, even though they don't look fantastic, they don't look absolutely awful because of the way that speed paints work. There's a whole host of different paints that you could use, but honestly, I would recommend kicking off with a contrast paint or a speed paint because it's just so much easier. But what about the game side of things? Now, my son has been really interested for some bizarre reason in the big monster manual that I've got, which is normally kicking around behind me somewhere. So I went out and I tried to find something that would fit his needs. Now, this is probably more catered towards a slightly older audience. I think they recommend from like 10 years up, but he's really enjoyed looking through all the pictures and asking me questions about all the different things. This set, basically, if you're looking to get into D&D, comes with all the different bits in there about different dungeons, about all the weapons and the warriors, spells, and then of course his absolute favourite is the monsters. and it just simplifies things a lot. Now, this is good just to kind of go through with kids, but more so if you've got just friends and family who are maybe not fully into D&D and they want to understand the basics of it without delving into the big like 300-400 page rule book. These are just a nice addition. Everything's just nice, simple, and easy to follow. And then speaking of easy rules, I had a look online to see if I could find anything that they could actually play once we'd basically got the minis and all the train done, and I found a few different options. But the one that I went with is an adventure called, I think it's The Ogre and His Cake, and it's basically an adventure that is made for kids. And everything's pre-made in it, it's got all the maps, it's got all the different characters that made. But the great thing about this one is not only is the storyline child-friendly and has a lot of things in there that are going to be great for kids, it takes all of like things like the character cards and all the spells and abilities, and it really simplifies them. So it's got these pre-made little cards that you can use rather than having a big character sheet with all the bits on there. It's made easy for kids to follow, and it's just nice and fun for them. And again, this could be quite handy for new players in the game who don't want to try and figure out absolutely everything that goes in with something like Dungeons & Dragons, because it's a stripped down version of that, which is fun and easy to play. So I'd be really interested to know what your tips are. How have you managed to get your friends, your family, your kids involved in the hobby? And what sort of tips do you have for everybody else as well? There's going to be loads of things that I've missed off there, but just in my brief time researching to get ready for my son's birthday, these things all seem to work really nicely. And he and my daughter have had an absolute blast painting, putting the models together, and just playing a few little battles. Certainly beats them grabbing all of my Games Workshop stuff and messing around with that, because my Space Marines are apparently big knights and they have to fight lots of little dragons. They're going to get broken and scratched to hell very, very soon. So throw your comments down below. What are your tips? How have you managed to get friends and family and your kids as well into the hobby, and what sort of things do you have to share with the community? Hope that's helped, and hopefully there's something in there that you can take away and share with your own family, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!